I'm his chairman in AIG Insurance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just delighted to see the crowd here. And as the passport says, I think you believe in living more and living better. Let me just say that I'm not accustomed to having a conference where people arrive on time. I'm totally amazed. Some of you even came at 1:30. So
Like
maybe
me.
this is the change of behavior and attitude about Filipino punctuality, aside from worrying about resiliency. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you all know about the disasters we've had in the past. You know about, oh dear, I forgot to turn on my phone, forgive me. It's President Ramos, never mind. That's true, it's him. I think, like
President Ramos
we have
yung
Mr.
tumatawag.
Jean-Pascal Van Ippersen, the Vice Chair of IPCC, who is one of the first who inspired me by talking about the sea level rise, which is 3 times more than the global average. And he said, you Filipinos better prepare for the future, because that's not going to happen just one time. It will happen again and again. And then again, you all know what the United Nations University said, that we are number 3 in vulnerability. And that's a statement of fact, after Vanuatu and Tonga. And I understand there's a new rating coming. Unfortunately, I'm sure we'll be in the top 5, nevertheless. So I think we have to learn how to cope with this new reality, what is called the so-called new normal. Science-based disaster preparedness and climate change adaptation are certainly part of the answer. Building back better, you've all heard about it, and it will also help. But we have to do substantially more. We have to transform our frame of mind, our thinking, and our development model to make us less exposed and vulnerable to natural hazards. This means changing our pattern of development to reduce existing ranks and hazards. And this means also that we have to prevent the creation of new problems and strengthen our absorptive, adaptive, and transformative capabilities to anticipate and recover rapidly from damaging events. And this is what we call resilience. Addressing our underlying vulnerability to natural hazards is absolutely essential. And let me put this in perspective. Haiti had a 7.0 earthquake in January 2010, and it killed more than 220,000 people. In contrast, Chile had one 8.8 on the Richter scale, and it killed 525 people. The Geneva International Displacement Monitoring Center estimated that if 2 cyclones of equal intensity were to hit both the Philippines and Japan, 17 times as many Filipinos than Japanese would be killed, and a far greater number of Filipinos would indeed be displaced, all due to the greater socio-economic vulnerability of the Pinoy. It is not the magnitude alone, but also a country's vulnerability that turns natural hazards into nightmarish disasters. Decades of dealing with disasters, some tell me, have taught us a lesson. I'm not quite sure how many. But some have indeed learned the lessons, and others have not. 2 outstanding examples are Governor Joey Salceda of Albay Province and the San Francisco Mayor Alfredo Arquillano. Both have been singled out for praise nationally and internationally as role models of how highly disaster-prone areas should prepare for and manage disasters. We'll hear more from Joey Salceda during this session. The experience of Fukushima Prefecture offers useful insights into the challenges of rebuilding after a disaster. In his presentation this afternoon, I'm pleased to have Professor Mimura, who will tell us the lessons learned from Fukushima that hold particular relevance to us here in the Philippines. And then followed by Dr. Abdul Lim, Deputy Director of the UNICEF, whose representative of the Philippines will share the Yolanda experience from the perspective of UNICEF. A panel discussion follows and will cap our session this afternoon. I strongly encourage during that session, I want it to be as interactive as possible, both from the panelists, the speakers, and you, the audience. And that's why I even have tweeters here. Because I want this to become a message to generate the awareness that we want people to understand that resilience goes beyond disaster relief management. And that is why our motto, or our tagline is prepare, adapt, and transform. And you'll hear more about that in the coming sessions. Thank you very much once again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Romulo, or should I say, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. We'll now move on to the first session with the theme from global to local, best practices in resilience. As Ambassador Romulo highlighted, this session aims to explore some of the best practices in the field, from the rebuilding of Fukushima and the Yolanda experience of UNICEF to Albay Province's leadership in implementing a comprehensive capacity development program on climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So we'll have three speakers this afternoon, and then followed by a panel discussion and open forum. So without any further delay, I would now like to invite to the stage Professor Satoru Mimura from Fukushima University in Japan to share with us the Fukushima experience.
Thank you, Mr. Edwin. Ambassador Romulo, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to participate in this remarkable conference on disaster and climate resilience. And I'm happy to have opportunity to share with you about the experience of Fukushima after a great East Japan earthquake. In my presentation today, I'd like to focus mainly on the social aspects, social issues we Fukushima people experienced after Great East Japan earthquake, rather than the nuclear accident itself. It's because I'm not a nuclear scientist, and also I would like you to know more than millions of people are suffering from the social issues, directly or indirectly caused by the disasters. First, I'd like to explain a bit about what Fukushima is. Fukushima is about 260 kilometers north of Tokyo. It takes 1 hour and a half from Tokyo by bullet train. And it is third largest prefecture in Japan in terms of land areas. And our economy is depending on agriculture and some manufacturing, and also energy. Fukushima, we have more than 100 years of history as an energy provider to Tokyo. We are rich in water resources, so there are many hydropower plants, and also we had coal mine, although it's already closed 40 years ago. And also in the coastal area, we have thermal and nuclear power plants. And 3 years ago, on March 11th, the tragedy happened. The coastline of Fukushima washed away, and many people lost their lives. And inland part of Fukushima, we experienced some sediment disaster as well. And the nuclear accident followed the natural disasters. It's because of the tsunami, the power plant lost power supply for cooling of their system, and a few days after, they had hydrogen explosion several times, and contaminated plume, radioactive contaminated plume, traveled from the nuclear power plant to northwestern direction, and some of our land were heavily contaminated by radioactives. And this is the number of victims due to the Great East Japan earthquake. And of course, Miyagi is worst affected, and the number of people killed in Fukushima is rather small, but you may be aware that the evacuees of Fukushima is a very big number. And in case of evacuees of Iwate and Miyagi, they lost their home by tsunami attack. But in case of Fukushima, most of the people who evacuated from their original place, their houses were not affected. They have to evacuate it because of the radioactive contamination. And still now on 130 or 140,000 people in Fukushima had to evacuate from their original places. And around 100,000 people who are ordered to evacuate from their original place because of the contamination. And some 30 to 40,000 people are evacuating voluntarily because of the fear for radiation. And they are living in this kind of temporary housing or the apartment. They are mainly from the rural part of Fukushima, and they had enjoyed a very luxury life in a big house in the rural area. They lived in some generations, 3-4 generations in one house, and they were enjoyed a good relation with their neighbors. But they were separated, and they had to live in this small temporary housing. This is the scene soon after the Great East Japan earthquake. We, Fukushima University, we opened up our gymnasium as a temporary shelter for the evacuees. And Fukushima Prefecture, as well as our university, conducted interviews and questionnaire surveys to pick up their difficulties, people who are affected by the disaster. And many of them complained that they experienced the breakup of communities, and they lost their relation with their neighbors. And also many people lost their livelihood or jobs. Many elderly were working in the farming land, but they lost the farmland, and now they are living in the small temporary housing. So it means it's not just they lost their jobs, but also their current situation is very inactive.
Resilient
So
village.
it causes another health problems for the evacuees. Actually, the number of obesity rate of Fukushima people is the highest in Japan after the disaster, and it causes another lifestyle disease. And some of the evacuees are receiving compensation money from Tokyo Electric Power Corporation, TEPCO, and some are not. And it might cause another conflict. So now many people, many evacuees living in Iwaki City, it's a neighboring city from the location of nuclear power plant, and people of host community in Iwaki, they are complaining about they are not receiving compensation money, but people who evacuated, they are receiving compensation money and they do not need to work. So there is a confrontation between the non-working rich and working poor. And also within the families, there is a gap for the sensitivity of radioactive exposure between the men and women. So there is another confrontation within the families. And of course, the displaced life is stressful, and we observed many cases of alcoholics and abuse. And 3 years have passed, and cleaning up work is processed. And in some areas in yellow color, now they are advised to prepare to return back their original places. But after 3 years passed, people tend to remain in their places where they are evacuating. It's because their original place, it's a lack of social service like hospitals, education, and their house had been abandoned for 3 years, and it was very much damaged, and it's not easy to repair the house for the elderly. And of course, job opportunity in the affected area is very small. So those are the main reasons for non-return. And radiation exposure is also the reason for non-return, but it's not the only cause for non-return. Many of them choose to stay in evacuation place because of the convenience of life, because now they are living in rather urban areas. They can easily access the hospital and education. So it's not easy to encourage the people to return back their original places. And there is a gap between elders and young, also male and female. As I mentioned, females are very sensitive about radiation exposure because, especially for the mothers who have small kids. Small kids are very sensitive for the radiation exposure, and the mothers would like to stay away from the dangerous place. But the elders, they wish to go back their original place because they have been living in their hometown for more than 60, 70 years. So elders tend to return, and youngs and females tend not return. I have been talking about the social issues of Fukushima, but not all the issues are new for us. Many of them are very common, not only in Fukushima, but also in most of the part of Japan, I mean the rural part of Japan. You may think Japan is an industrialized country, but the fact is more than 70% of our land use is mountainous or the agricultural fields. Only Tokyo and Nagoya area experience the increase in population, but other areas we are experiencing decrease in population for these years. Especially for the rural areas, younger generation tend to go to the urban cities like Tokyo to get a better opportunity for education and jobs. And it causes further decrease in birth rate and progress of aging society. And it further causes deterioration of regional economy. And those issues have been observed even before the Great East Japan earthquake. But those issues were exacerbated by nuclear accident. And so we have many issues we have to challenge. And Fukushima University is only national university in Fukushima Prefecture. We have been working with communities, local communities and local governments for tens of years. And since immediately after the disaster, we started our support program in various fields like life and job support, community support, and radiation measurements, and child and youth support. Those are the pictures of our activities. We are supporting community center in Koriyama City. And also, we are working with farmers to check the radiation level of the farming products in Fukushima. Actually, all the grain of rice are checked, the radiation level in Fukushima. And actually 0.00 something percent is the contaminated ones. And we are checking all the paddy field and orchards. And also we are trying to clarify the mechanisms of transportation of the radioactive materials from soil and water to the plant body. So we are carrying out such activities and try to rebuild trustship with consumers. And we are supporting youth and children. Youth and children are the most affected people due to the nuclear accident. Not only by the, not only in terms of the health, but many youth, they had to change their life plan due to the accident because their mothers, fathers lost their jobs and they have to live outside of Fukushima. So thousands of youth forced to choose different plan from their original thinking. And also we are providing the summer camps for children because children they are also evacuated with their parents. So some of them had some mental problems. So we provide an occasion to reunion their old friends in summer camps. And through those activities, we can share our lessons learned from Fukushima. The most important thing is to work with community. Community people, or the people affected by disasters, they are very, very vulnerable. But it not means they are powerless. Without their motivation and initiative, we cannot build our town back better. And I try to conclude my presentation. Disaster increase, especially in Asia-Pacific region. It's because, partly because of climate change and also urbanization and industrialization is important reason for increase in disasters. And also, I would like to emphasize hazard interact. We experienced it in Fukushima. Some man-made disaster consequent to the natural disasters. The Fukushima case might be the unusual one, but I think we can share some common knowledge learned from the experience. And this is a recommendation from Fukushima. There are many disasters again and again. Some are low intensity but high frequency, like floods we experience every year. And also, we have to prepare for the low probability or low frequency, but the high impact ones, like Great East Japan earthquake, or the Typhoon Yolanda, or at this moment, Japan is experiencing a big typhoon in our islands. And I'm planning to go back on Friday, but my friend told me that my flight might be cancelled because of the typhoon. But and it is one of the biggest typhoon in those 20-30 years. But we have to prepare such low frequency but high impact disasters. And we have to prepare for the complex of disaster or the consequence of disasters as well. And in order to increase the resilience, working with community is a key point. So that's all from me today, and I would like to share our experience, and I would like to learn each other. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Nomura, for sharing your insights as well as your personal experience with the Fukushima disaster. After hearing and seeing so much about Fukushima from abroad or from a distance, it's quite moving and quite insightful to hear, firsthand about the experience and studies that you've seen there. I find it personally quite interesting and informative to our own experience here in the Philippines about hearing about reasons why people don't want to return to the affected zone, and the fact that it's not radiation contamination that's one of the major factors. Also hearing about the social issues that are ancillary to the disaster, even things like alcoholism, domestic abuse. Those are parts of the experience that probably don't first come to mind when it comes to how to respond or how to build a resilient community. So thank you very much for sharing those insights with us. I think this is a good jumping off point now to bring us a little bit closer to home here in the Philippines. And so I think at the next stage, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Abdul Alim from UNICEF Philippines, to share the UNICEF Philippines experience firsthand with the Yolanda disaster. Dr. Alim.
Thank you, Ambassador Romulo, for inviting me. I must say that every time I start getting pessimistic about what is happening in the Philippines, there is some of these occasions that one goes to and your hope is restored that something is going to really happen quickly and constructively. And I must first start with the acknowledgement of the fact that UNICEF is greatly privileged to be of being here and of being service to the children of Philippines. And one of the things that I would like to point out here and that people already know and has been repeated very often in the media is how resilient people of the Philippines are. And one of the personal witnesses that I can bring to you is on my first visit to Tacloban with our headquarter visitors, we were able to visit a school in very early time of the disaster. Sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint, so you have to look at me and my face, and I hope they don't dislike it for me. I just wanted not to have a PowerPoint so that you can focus on me rather than on the slides. But I just wanted to let you know how moved we were to meet a young woman who was in a school and was teaching about 8 children. And this is within a week of the disaster, and we wanted to find out how was she able to actually mobilize so quickly and get children back into school. And she took us into the classroom. The classroom looked quite nice. Of course, the roof was not there. But the children were happy and they were going about their activities. And she came out and we were talking to her about her own motivation and what she was doing. And she appeared to be very normal and smiling and laughing and talking to us and engaged. And then one of our female companions took her aside and asked her about how she was doing personally. And that's when she broke down. And she told us that she had lost her husband just 2 days back. And her husband was in one of the smaller radio stations and was actually in the process of warning people when the storm overtook him. And that showed me how resilient people are here, where a woman like that who had lost her husband just 2 days back was able to actually get children back into school and was already teaching them. And that was really, really moving for me, and that really shaped to a large extent our ability to help the children of Philippines. I will very briefly describe to you what UNICEF did for the Yolanda, but this is really not a pitch for UNICEF here. I do really want to pay more attention to what can be done better in the next time this happens. But I would be amiss if I don't say to you that there was, of course, a huge amount of outpouring for sympathy for the people of Philippines all over the world. And we ran one of the most successful global campaigns for raising funds for the Philippines. And we are still implementing that response, and it will go into the next year because of the huge amount of money that we got in response and the global sympathy for the Philippines here. The second thing I want to say is that we were the first agency to mobilize, especially our national Filipino colleagues who were extremely dedicated people who went out to Rojas and to Tacloban and were the first emergency teams who were actually deployed to provide relief to the people of Philippines. And then so far we have been able to access almost 1.5 million people with our resources, and we will continue to do so in the next 6 to 8 months of our response. But that's where I stop telling you about UNICEF and what UNICEF did for the Yolanda. I do want to let you know that there are a huge amount of concerns on what is going to happen next. And is the country ready for something like this again? We already know the projections of the Pagasa say that there are about 18 more typhoons ready to hit Philippines this year. And it is more likely that some of them will be like Yolanda, hopefully not, but they may be like Yolanda. And are the people of Philippines ready to lose that much amount of life and human capital that they lost in Yolanda? And the answer to that question is really, really critical. And that's why I'm here today. I want to really gather your attention to 4 or 5 aspects of where I believe it is really critical for the people of Philippines, for the private sector, for the government, and for everyone in the Philippines to gather their attention and do something about it. We started our country program, this one, about 3 years back. And we went to NEDA and to several departments, and we presented to them our analysis of where we believe Philippines is most vulnerable. And we outlined some of the typologies in terms of which municipalities, for example, in the Philippines are the ones that can be affected by disasters, those which are affected by conflict, and those which are affected by rapid urbanization. And we believe that there was an approach for the government to take to incorporate that in their planning process and make sure that those municipalities which were vulnerable to these kinds of risks are paid attention to in terms of priority of investments. And that we believe is still the pathway to go. And thankfully, NEDA has now come up with a new Philippines development plan that actually includes those vulnerability analysis of municipalities that are exposed to disasters, and they are now paying attention to that methodology of analysis. The second thing I want to say is that we lost about 6,000 people in Yolanda. That cost is unbearable. Even one human life lost is too many people lost and too much loss. And you can never make up for that loss, no matter how long the time goes. And so one of the most critical aspects of response is what happens within the first 42 to 72 hours in any emergency. And as you know, both from Pablo and from other emergencies in the Philippines, and of course from Yolanda, one of the first things that happens is that you actually get the areas affected by disasters get blocked by inability to access because of not only issues of infrastructure but electricity outs and several other things that happen at the same time. You don't have cell phone signals, you can't really get into those areas which have been affected. And one of the most important things that needs to be done is to build a civil, military, private sector coalition that can have access secured to people who are suffering within the first 42 to 72 hours. I can tell you that it is of course the children who are the most vulnerable, and they will die the first, and within the first 42 to 72 hours. And we know that the government tried very hard, and that every one of us tried very hard. The team Albay was there of Albay province, and they were able to access those areas. But this can still be improved by a careful structuring of a partnership between the civil agencies, the military agents, military apparatus, the military assets, and the private sector, which can play a very important role. And we are happy to, I'm happy to report that actually we didn't meet General Bautista about this, and he was very open to in fact bringing in the military, and also we offered them to train military personnel who actually get into those areas as the first personnel who can get access to those areas. So these are the people who need to be trained, and we need to have dedicated units who can actually do these things on a full-time basis. The second thing I want to say is, 6 months down the line today, we still have LGUs who have not received government funding for providing relief to their people. And last week, we actually held a seminar where we called Department of Budget and DSWD along with some of these LGU mayors which were affected in Region 8, and we asked the mayors to ask them a question about what is really happening, because the money is still not there. And the answer to that question from DBM was that part of the problem is of course the release of the money and the hindrance from COA, which is going to be overseeing the expenditure. So there are really practical difficulties in terms of fiscal processes that need to be resolved very quickly now that we are in this lull period, where we need to make sure that new instruments of rapid fiscal flows can be put into place, where municipalities can get money within the first 2-3 weeks of something like this when it happens. It is not acceptable for people of these areas not to be able to get national money 6-7 months down the road. Not acceptable. And I think we need to address that. And I would call private sector to help, because I believe that some of the difficulties that municipalities suffer from is the lack of ability to account for that money. And if you were able to, let's say, even place some of your accountants for the short term in those municipalities which are affected, it can go a long way for them to be able to access the national money that they need to get. Third thing I want to say is the aspect of human resilience. There is a very huge amount of interest and initiative on infrastructure. And of course, I don't mind that. It's very important economically. But remember that the loss that you have suffered is 6,000 people lost and 15.1 million affected. And these are people whose lives have been completely uprooted. And this is a serious loss of human capital. If these people were poor, if their children were malnourished, and I can tell you that Eastern Visayas is one of the parts of the country that has about 30% malnutrition even before Yolanda hit. And you can't even imagine what it will be now. So the question is that the loss of human capital has happened, and it continues even today because it is only being partially addressed. Now, we as UNICEF, we are sort of shouting in big halls to try and divert the attention of everybody around us to say, do more for human capital. Building up human capital is what resilience is about. It is not building up roads only, it is not only building schools. You need to have children who are healthy, who can get to schools if you are building good schools. So it is important to nourish children, it is important to make sure that they have the right kind of training on, let's say, disaster preparedness. These are the soft elements of resilience that not very many people actually pay attention to. We are doing some of that, and we are, for example, putting in training programs for children to withstand psychosocial stress. We have worked with Department of Education to supply them with education material that can withstand some of these things. We have, for example, worked with Department of Health to put in cold storage facilities which can work on solar power, so that if something like this hits and the electricity gets cut off, your vaccines don't get destroyed. So some of these things can be put into place which are resilient, but the soft component is really, really critical, and that must focus on human capital. Two more things I want to say. One is that the whole exercise about data collection on what happened post-Yolanda was again very much biased towards infrastructure. So if you look at what the government did in terms of PDNA and what even the UN did, I include the UN in that also, most of it was focused on what happened in terms of infrastructure loss. And I have kept advocating with the government to say, look, what you need to do is to do a social household level survey in at least 150 municipalities that were directly affected by this storm. Because until you know what is really now the actual rate of malnutrition, what happened to infant mortality, what happened to maternal mortality, how many people are now exposed to who are going to die within the next 6 or 7 months because you have lost the health systems and the education systems, is what we need to know. And we have offered to even help implement that survey in at least 100 municipalities that were affected by Yolanda. We believe it is very, very important to get the data from households to be able to mount the right kind of response and to build human capital over the long term. Last thing I want to say is that both from Bopa and from Zamboanga and from Bohol and from Yolanda, we already know that there is a chronic issue of land use and land ownership in this country. And that needs to be resolved on war footing. Because what you have is people do get displaced. And then now we have people who cannot go back because their areas, of course, they were built in danger zones. They want to go to areas which are already owned by the private sector or has other land ownership. And what do these people do? Where do they go back to? So it does become a chronic issue of land ownership and land rights. And there needs to be some sort of initiative, both by private sector and by the government, to ensure that those issues in terms of processes and procedures are resolved, so that these things can be returned, people can return back to their origin very quickly. And that's where I stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Aleem. There's nothing like thinking about the plight of the human suffering, and especially children, to really move the heart and the mind. And as you put it, the needs around the human capital, really that highlights the needs for resilience, and I think it really puts some life into the vision behind resiliency in the Philippines and the vision for resiliency that's driving this conference here today. At this point, we're going to actually ask for your pardon. We're going to add one more addition or one change into the published agenda for today. Originally, we had hoped for 4 speakers due to some errors and last-minute changes. Actually, our next speaker was omitted from the program, so I'll beg your pardon, and also apologize for Mr. Kanishi. But at this point, we're going to add an additional speaker into the agenda. So I'd like to invite Mr. Motoo Kanishi who is the country representative for the World Bank, to join me on stage.
World Bank. What's his name? There. Right.
Just to begin, sorry for crashing the party. The omission is probably from our side. We have our president visiting this weekend, on Monday and Tuesday, and meeting with President Aquino on Tuesday, and it's been pretty frantic for us. But nevertheless, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation and allowing me to speak. The second thing is, and you probably talked about this already, when a disaster hits, there is a relief part, there's a recovery part, and there's reconstruction and resilience. My colleague from UNICEF talked about the relief portion and the recovery portion. What I'm going to talk about is about reconstruction and resilience. And the point that I would like to make is those 6,000 people didn't have to die. If you built resilient infrastructure, and as Professor Miura talked about, having infrastructure that allows people to get away from the threat. When you look at the typhoon that is going through now, that missed Philippines and is now going right through Japan at 250 kilometers per hour. It went through Okinawa, and I think the fatality was very small. That is because they've spent years building resilient infrastructure. Right? And that requires incredible amount of planning, incredible amount of funding, and basically long-term infrastructure investment that protects people. I wish to thank the Romulo Foundation and Peace and Development, Zuellig Family Foundation, and the Manila Observatory for the invitation. Building climate smart and climate resilient urban and rural communities is an important topic as it is relevant to broad spectrum of the population. One way or another, whether in the province of Leyte or on the streets of Metro Manila, no one has been spared from the grim consequences of climate change. While all of us here in this room have experienced the effects of climate change, its consequences on us may not be as dramatic as their impact on the poor. There are 25.2 million Filipinos who live below the poverty line. 6.3 million of these are concentrated in cities and urban municipalities. The poor, in urban and rural areas alike, suffer disproportionately from the impact of climate change. The lives of informal settlers along the drainage systems in the urban areas are constantly a threat when the rains and the floods come. Likewise, in the rural areas where 3/4 of the poor live, it is not only their lives that are at danger, but their crops and their main sources of livelihood as well. For instance, it is very sad to note that Typhoon Yolanda pushed additional 2 million people below the poverty line just overnight. This illustrates one clear lesson from the experience in the Philippines and other countries. If we don't confront climate change now, we won't end extreme poverty. Both the private and public sectors have to work together to address the impacts of climate change, or else it will be impossible to eliminate extreme poverty and create a prosperous country. So, how do we address the climate change? The Philippines is one of the countries most exposed to multiple hazards, is amongst those at the highest risk to climate change impacts. More intense rainfall events, more hot spells, stronger monsoons, and rainfall variability are expected. In addition, there could be higher tropical cyclones with extreme high wind speeds, as we saw in Typhoon Yolanda, and heavier precipitation, as we saw in Typhoon Ondoy, and changes in storm tracks, as Typhoon Pablo in Mindanao. These increases in climate variability and weather extremes have broad consequences for the developing countries and high poverty incidence and high exposure of natural hazards like the Philippines. Typhoon Yolanda heightens everybody's concerns on what might become the new normal for the country in terms of increased intensity and natural disaster. And I think it's safe to assume that this is now going to be the new normal that we will be facing in the Philippines. So, if the Philippines will be constantly battered by climate change impacts, how do we respond? Building climate smart and climate resilient urban and rural communities will be the key. Basically, building climate smart and climate resilient communities means relatively simple: building public and private infrastructure that can withstand major threats like strong rains, floods, storm surge, or tsunami. It also means that communities provide infrastructure where people can seek shelter and protection when alert levels for floods and tsunami are raised. When I was growing up in Japan, when the siren went off for tsunami, we are instructed to run to the school. And schools are supposed to withstand almost anything. And that is where the protection is for the public. And I think we need to think about that in the Philippines, particularly also in the rural areas, because many places, they don't have anywhere to go to. In fact, some of the places that people evacuated to got washed out. So when we talk about resilience, these are the things that we're thinking about. I would like to share with you how the World Bank Group has been helping the country adapt and prosper in the midst of climate change. To be climate smart is the main objective, from the broad policy environment down to communities and households, and from urban to rural localities. Philippines has made commendable progress and has demonstrated tangible commitments by clarifying its climate policies and governance over the last few years. The World Bank has supported the government to review its public expenditures and institutional arrangements in implementing these programs. The World Bank, through our technical advisory services, is supporting the government to identify and tag expenditures aimed at developing climate resilience, to prioritize these expenditures in the budget, and to strengthen the design and the implementation of key climate programs. These technical advisory services are complemented by direct investment into resilient buildings through projects such as Metro Manila flood management, as well as ongoing and new efforts to expand access to international sources of financing for climate activities. How can we be climate smart in urban areas? The Philippines continues to urbanize rapidly with more and more informal settlers in major metropolitan areas such as Metro Manila. More than half of the informal settler families are living in danger zones such as waterways, shorelines, and low-lying areas, making them vulnerable to natural disasters and climate change impacts. World Bank has been supporting the agenda in safe housing and resettlement since the onslaught of Ondo in 2009. For example, the bank has supported the formulation of the Metro Manila Flood Management Master Plan, a massive 25-year investment program to protect Metro Manila from future floods. Detailed design will be prepared in the coming months that will help make hundreds of communities, rich and poor alike, living along the floodplain and lake shore safer against flooding. It is important to emphasize here that the engineering solution is oftentimes much easier to manage than the social aspects of resettlement and housing of the poor who live in the danger zone. Without the social engineering solution of resettling those who live in the flood danger zones, the actual physical infrastructure to protect Metro Manila may not materialize. At the policy level, the World Bank has been working with HUD-C to develop national informal settlement upgrading strategy. The strategy will define the basic principles for guiding the government, national and local, in developing and implementing effective policies and programs that will improve the conditions of informal settlers and enable safe, affordable, and resilient housing for the poor. On the ground, the World Bank has been supporting the key shelter agencies in finding feasible measures to ensure that the people's quality of living is not harmed by the implementation of large-scale flood control infrastructure. This requires finding measures to ensure that, one, technical designs and solutions require minimal relocation of people. Second, a targeted subsidy based on an income level to make in-city relocations affordable. Third, and key stakeholders, in particular communities themselves, are informed and actively involved in the decision-making process of the move. What about the rural communities? What does it mean to promote climate resiliency in rural areas? About half of the country's poor derive in their income from agriculture, fisheries, and other natural resources in rural communities. These resources are especially susceptible to natural disasters and climate change impacts. Poor rural communities are even more vulnerable because they have fewer options and fewer coping mechanisms for dealing with major climate change-induced impacts. The World Bank's Philippines Climate Change Adaptation Project, or PhilCAP, has assisted the Philippines government's efforts to establish climate-smart and climate-resilient rural communities. It seeks to pilot test innovative measures that will assist workers in agriculture and natural resources, to say farmers and fisher folks, to better adapt to climate change impacts and respond to climate change-related risks. For example, we can provide information on rice varieties that can adapt to saltwater intrusion due to sea level rises. And another example is climate-proofing irrigation system by incorporating climate change scenarios in designing national irrigation systems. The project is closely linked with ongoing World Bank investment projects like the Participatory Irrigation Development Project with NIA and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. The project helps to scale up and mainstream successful PhilCAP pilots to other rural communities in the Philippines. In addition, the bank is also mainstreaming climate-smart agriculture and climate resiliency in its lending operation in agriculture under the Philippine Rural Development Program. Last but not least, we believe in the power of making disaster climate information and knowledge available and mainstreaming its decision-making. This means providing timely and ready access and capacity to utilize relevant location-specific disasters and climate-related information and knowledge to stakeholders. This includes the simple provision of disaster and climate information to guide land use planning and delineate hazard zones and areas for settlement, production, and development. It also includes the development and dissemination of sophisticated decision support tools such as hazard and climate-based models to stimulate scenarios for development policies and planning. In essence, knowledge and capacity buildings are the foundation for establishing climate-smart and resilient communities. Bank acknowledges that delivering on the resilience agenda calls for working in broad group of stakeholders. Initiative today demonstrates the pivotal role that the private sector plays in ensuring that the Philippines rise from the tragedies of the past and become all the more capable in dealing with the new normal if developments were to be sustained in this country. The World Bank